Hello everyone, my name is Jarrett, and today I'm going to be talking about the gene-drug interaction between CYP2B6 and bupropion. So what is CYP2B6? Well, CYP2B6 is a gene that encodes for the production of the enzyme CYP2B6, which is an enzyme of the cytochrome P450 family. Um, in general, this family of enzymes is the most common family of enzymes in general that we'll see in metabolism. They metabolize most drugs, and they're found in the liver. An estimated 1 to 10% of contribution to CYP metabolism overall is seen by this enzyme CYP2B6. The enzyme is expressed in higher amounts in females on average, about 1.6-fold, and that's in the expression of the enzyme itself. When you look at actual mRNA expression, it's around 4 times higher expression in females than it is in males. The most common variant of CYP2B6 is the CYP2B6 haplotype. Depending on the ethnicity of the patient, around 15 to 60% of any given population can have this haplotype. The main function of CYP2B6 in general is to perform a hydroxylation reaction, which we'll see in a minute coming up. So shown right here is a chart of common haplotypes and their effects on how the gene is expressed. So basically, if we look over here, what we can see is what we were talking about before. The CYP2B6 6 haplotype right here is the most common one. Generally, what this will do is it will decrease expression of the enzyme, which will decrease activity with efavirenz in vivo. What efavirenz is it's that hydroxylation reaction. It's the most important and primary reaction that this enzyme carries out. These other ones are more minor. You can see here the locations that they occur in. And yeah, most of the genes and most of the most common genes and haplotypes in this gene family decrease the expression of the enzyme. There are a few, as we can see up here, like CYP2B64 and CYP2B622 that actually increase expression of the enzyme. They're not very common though. They'll only be seen in very small proportions of the population. So what actually is bupropion? Well, bupropion is an antidepressant. It's a very atypical antidepressant. It doesn't look like a lot of things that we'll see on market today, but in its own right, it's worked very well as an antidepressant. It's approved for use in major depressive disorder, seasonal affective disorder, and smoking cessation. It's got different formulations for all of those. And as we talked about before, it's primarily metabolized by CYP2B6. It has other enzymes that will metabolize it, which we'll see on the next slide. But CYP2B6 is the major enzyme, and it's the primary metabolizing enzyme. CYP2B6 is especially important too because it produces an active metabolite, 6-hydroxybupropion. We talked about before on that last slide that reaction that hydroxylates bupropion, and it's an active metabolite. So in vivo research has shown that up to 20 times greater AUC is seen in the active metabolite as compared to bupropion itself. So as you can see, that is pretty important to the action of this drug. It's not quite a prodrug, but definitely you're losing a lot, maybe even most of the effectiveness if you decrease the amount of that active metabolite that we're seeing. Another thing that's interesting about bupropion is it has a very unique structure and mechanism as an antidepressant. A lot of the antidepressants that we see on market today are inhibitors of serotonin reuptake, but bupropion inhibits dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake. As you can see by the structure over here, it resembles a lot of our monoamines. It looks a little bit like norepinephrine or dopamine. It's a classic phenethylamine, as we can see right here. So we've talked a little bit about it, but what is the actual interaction between bupropion and this enzyme CYP2B6? Well, as you can see by looking at this schematic over here, This primary enzyme right here that goes to the primary active metabolite, hydroxybupropion right here, that is much stronger than bupropion, is done through the action of CYP2B6. So when we have increased expression of CYP2B6, you might have a more effective drug because of the fact that you'll be just expressing more of it in general. You'll be producing more of that active metabolite as compared to things right here, such as more minor metabolites like this 4'-hydroxybupropion or all these other metabolites down here that are just not active metabolites. They're a lot less effective and not effective at all in the slightest. So in thinking about that, we can think about what inducers and inhibitors of CYP2B6 might do to a drug. So if you have an inhibitor of CYP2B6, it's going to increase the serum concentration of bupropion and decrease serum concentrations of hydroxybupropion, and the opposite for anything that will induce it. You can think about that the same way that you would think about the enzyme expression. If we have higher expression of the enzyme, we're going to have less active metabolite, and therefore we're going to decrease the expression of the active metabolite, and we're going to, the concentration of it rather, and we're going to increase the concentration of bupropion itself. Now, sometimes, for some drugs, that might sound like a good thing, but as we talked about before with bupropion, the active metabolite is very important in the mechanism, up to 20 times more potent. So, for example, if we have something like CYP2B6, which decreases expression of the enzyme and in turn decreases the use of that efavirenz reaction that hydroxylates bupropion, we're going to have a much less effective drug. But what does this all mean? So there are some things that we could do for bupropion. Really, this interaction in general benefits a lot from the fact that it is part of the cytochrome P450 family of enzymes, which are very highly tested for. There's a lot of tests that will test for them. They're very well studied just because they're so important in metabolism in general. So you have widely available genotyping for finding different polymorphisms in CYP2B6, I'm sorry, but also CYP2D6. So it's pretty easy to get the right idea for a patient on what they might be looking at and what drugs will work and what shouldn't. So I think that really there's no reason that we shouldn't be utilizing genotyping more for this particular interaction. Now, how important is it? It's not really an interaction that's going to cause many health issues. Perhaps if you have an induced enzyme and you have a way too high concentration of the active metabolite, you might see a little bit more, slightly more toxic effects that are related to dopamine and norepinephrine, such as like just basic adrenergic and parasympathetic, or sympathetic rather, effects, and things such as psychosis with increased amounts of dopamine. So what really, in that case, knowing all that, what do we do if someone actually has a detrimental polymorphism of this gene? There aren't really any guidelines on currently how to proceed with this. No one has come out and said, hey, if someone has CYP2B6, we need to stop using this drug with them. It hasn't been that much of a need for it, but some studies show that the drug might not be effective at all if you are below a certain AUC, and as such, it's probably a good thing to test for some of these polymorphisms to make sure that they don't occur, so that we're not wasting our time and not helping the patient. Because if we're giving the patient a drug that might not be effective at all and they're not getting the treatment that they need, that's not good. So I think that the most useful thing for genotyping in this case would be switching to other options rather than increasing or decreasing doses.